Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's recap, review, and analysis of Black Mirror Bandersnatch. This video will include heavy spoilers for Bandersnatch, and I feel I need to give a special spoiler warning for this one, as I will spoil every possible ending in this interactive movie. So for those who perhaps only seen one or two endings, this review will possibly still contain spoilers for you. But if you haven't seen Bandersnatch, you can check out my spoiler-free review, which I'll put a link to in the description below. But you may proceed with this review as long as you don't mind these heavy spoilers ahead. So in my spoiler-free review, I gave it a 9 out of 10, but mentioned this was only my first impression, that I may change my mind the more I watch it, and it turns out that I did. The more I watched it, the more I loved it. And this film was all I could think about for several days. I found that that only happens to me with movies that I really love. So I do believe this may in fact be one of my favorite movies of all time, and this certainly is my favorite Black Mirror piece. And the thing is, the first time I watched it and reached one of the endings, I didn't really care for it. I was like, well, that was kind of pointless. But after I saw a few more endings, I appreciated it a bit more, but still thought the interactive function undermined the narrative structure. But then I kept watching and exploring all the endings, and eventually I found that the film is actually brilliant and uses the interactive narrative to its advantage to tell a very complex and thought-provoking story that examines how much control do we truly have in our lives and what impact do the decisions we make have. And it appears this film was made to be watched again, so it's specifically made to be watched multiple times. And I personally love films that are good to watch multiple times and that you pick up new things each time you watch them. Those have always been my favorite kinds of film, which may be why I love this movie so much. In fact, it reminded me a lot of one of my all-time favorite films, Donnie Darko. In fact, I would say it has a very strong Donnie Darko feel to it, which may be why some didn't like this film, because they're not into watching films multiple times and contemplating on its meaning, and they just like to watch a film once and be done with it. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not putting anyone down who prefers to do that with films, nor am I saying if you didn't like this film, that means you only like movies superficially. I am not saying that at all. Everyone has their personal taste. What I'm saying is this film applies specifically to my taste perfectly, and I absolutely love it. So first off, let me get into the endings. As the producers said, there are 5 endings, and it took me a while to figure out what they meant. So I boiled it down to my interpretation of what those 5 main endings are. Now, what I consider an ending is if after watching the ending it gives you the option to watch the credits and then to end the movie. If it doesn't give you the option to watch the credits, I consider that a dead end, which I'll get to a bit later. So the 5 endings as I refer to them are the 5-star ending, the no Bandersnatch ending, the program and control ending, the Netflix ending, and the time travel ending. So the 5-star ending has just one variation. It can be reached by selecting the glyph symbol that appeared in the White Bear episode for the sign to reveal to Stefan, and then select to kill Stefan's dad, and then select to chop up his body, where Stefan gets to finish the game undisturbed and he gets a 5-star review. But then it's pulled from shelves when they discover that Stefan killed his father. And then we flash to the future, or to the present times, where you see Cullen's daughter Pearl trying to revive Bandersnatch. The ending is considered by some to be the definitive ending of the movie, and in some ways I think the film itself presents this ending that way. This is definitely the quote-unquote winning ending. That is, if you consider Bandersnatch to be a game, this is the ending where you win, because you get a 5-star rating on Bandersnatch, and it's the only ending to intertwine with the credits. And some have said that this was their favorite ending, but it's not my personal favorite ending. It's probably my second favorite ending, but I'll get into my favorite ending a bit later. Anyway, the next ending is the No Bandersnatch ending, which has 4 variations. You get to this one by selecting the glyph symbol as the sign, killing Dad, and then burying the body. All variations end with the dog digging up the body and Stefan being interrupted, so he goes to jail for killing his dad, but Bandersnatch is never released because of this. Variation 1, when the boss asks Stefan if he'll be done today and you put no, the boss comes over and is killed. Variation 2, if you put yes, Colin comes over and you can choose to kill him, and it ends the same with the dog digging up the body, except the newscast mentions Colin was killed too. Variation 3, you choose to let Colin go. Colin simply calls the police and Stefan gets arrested immediately. Variation 4, if you did choose to follow Colin at the towards the start of the movie, he's missing, so Kitty comes over looking for him, and regardless of what you choose to tell her, it all ends with her leaving and the dog digging up the body. And on the newscast they mention that Colin mysteriously vanished, where Stefan claims that he killed himself. But even within these 4 variations, you can get little variations within these variations that verify depending on some of the choices you made earlier. Also, it should be noted, all endings where Colin doesn't die, the newscast mentions that he gets arrested for possession of illicit substances. The program and control ending has 2 variations. You have to follow Colin to get this option, and then choose to pick up the book. And when you get to the dad's safe, select PAC as the password. Then it will take you to a funky scene where Stefan sees his whole life as a government project, and his food was being drugged, and his dad's not really his dad, he's just been studying him, and the whole thing with his mother was staged. And in this case, it doesn't give you the option to kill Stefan's dad, he just does it, and it ends with him going to jail. Bandersnatch is released, but only gets 2.5-star rating because Stefan was too distracted by the PAX delusion to finish the game properly. The 2 variations come in when it asks you to enter Dr. Haynes' number. If you get it right, Stefan calls and gets her secretary and goes a bit mad about how he knows about program and control, and reveals that he killed his father and threatens to kill Dr. Haynes. Her secretary, of course, calls the police and Stefan is immediately arrested. Variation 2, if you get Dr. Haynes' number wrong, in which case Stefan is too distracted to work on Bandersnatch, and then the dog comes and uncovers the body and Stefan is arrested. The Netflix ending has 2 variations, although one variation is considered a dead end. This ending, of course, is when you select Netflix as the sign that you give Stefan, and then all the choices after that are irrelevant until it asks you to fight Dr. Haynes. If you choose to jump out the window, you get the meta ending where they're on set of Black Mirror. If you choose to fight her, they fight, and it ends with Stefan's dad dragging him out the door while Stefan screams in madness. This is actually considered a dead end, as it doesn't give you the option to watch the credits, but the meta ending does give you that option. The time travel ending has 1 variation. This is possibly the most difficult ending to get to, as you can't get to it on your first time through, as in order to get through this you have to choose to talk about Stefan has to choose to talk about his mother with Dr. Haynes, and then you have to choose to pick up the family photo to get that scene where Stefan is time traveling through the mirror, and then you have to get to an ending and then go back to where you get the selection of pick up family photo or the book, and this time you choose to pick up the book, and then you get to Stefan's dad's safe, and you enter the passcode as toy, in which Stefan then travels back in time where he's 5 years old, and his mom asks him if he wants to go with her. You choose yes, where he'll go with her and die on the train, and in the present he dies while sitting in Dr. Haynes' office. So the ending is one I was alluding to that is my favorite ending. It had me in tears the first time I saw it, and it has a real Donnie Darko feel to it, and I love Donnie Darko, so this ending gives me the same chills, particularly the scene where he time travels through the mirror reminded me a lot of Donnie Darko. So now let me get into all of the dead ends. That is what I refer to the endings that prompt you to try again without giving you the option to watch the credits. In the Choose Your Own Adventure books, this is the wrong ending that you would get where you're eaten by a monster or whatever, and it would end badly, and you would have to go back and read to the spot you were at before. As I said in my spoiler-free review, these frustrated me a little bit at first, but later I realized that even these served a purpose. So anyway, the first dead end you're likely to get is that the one I got on my first time watching, and from what I understand, most people got this ending as the first time they watched it, is when you're at Tuckersoft and the boss offers for you to work there. And if you choose to accept, you get Colin telling you that it's wrong path, and then it jumps in time where Bandersnatch is released, and it gets a 0 out of 5 review, as apparently working in a group has stifled Stefan's creativity. The reviewer says that it was just too short and ended too soon, which is obviously a meta commentary for this ending as it comes too soon in the movie. The next dead end is when you gives you the option of throwing tea over the computer or shouting at Dad. And if you choose to throw tea over the computer, that just ends the game, as Stefan has destroyed all of his work, so that's the end of the story. So the next dead end, which is a literal dead end, is when you follow Colin and do drugs with him, and he says one of them is going to jump off the balcony, and if you choose for Stefan to jump, he of course dies, and that's the end. We get a Bandersnatch review where it says it's terrible, violent, creepy, dark, and awful, which is again meta commentary on how gruesome this ending is. Next dead end is if you didn't select to go with Colin and you went instead directly to see Dr. Haynes. She prescribes you pills, and it gives you the option to take the pills. And if you do, it jumps to an end where Bandersnatch is released, and it gets 2.5-star rating, as the reviewer says it feels like the creator was on autopilot for the second half of the game. So apparently taking the pills has stifled Stefan's creativity. So another dead end, it gives you the option to hit the desk or destroy the computer, and if you destroy the computer, the game ends because Stefan has destroyed his work, but his father comes in the room and starts hugging him and comforting him, and they embrace, but that's the end of the story. Now, I already talked about the Netflix dead end, so let me now get to the final dead end where it gives you the option to kill Stefan's dad or to back off. And if you choose to back off, Stefan and his father embrace and comfort each other, but that's the end of it, and then it prompts you to try again. Also, it should be noted that some scenes change when you go back and try again, such as the first time Colin says that he hasn't read Bandersnatch and is just meeting Stefan for the first time, but when you go back he says that he has read Bandersnatch and he seems to know a lot about it, and he tells Stefan that they've met before. Also, after Colin jumps off the balcony, if you go back and Colin is there, he'll say, I told you I'd see you around. He said, I'll see you around before he jumped off the balcony. And if you retry the scene where Dr. Haynes prescribes him medicine, he'll interrupt her and tell her to just prescribe the pills and get on with it. Also, many choices are taken away from you, as it often jumps to conclusions, like when Stefan's boss calls him after he kills his dad, he answers it and says that the game will be ready by the end of the day and just hangs up. And if you try again, he'll just pick up the phone and hang up immediately, which will prompt Stefan's boss to go and check on him. And I'm sure there are many more that I didn't cover. So all of this implies that the characters themselves are affected by trying these results multiple times and are somewhat aware of the events that have already occurred, and they know what to expect, which is pretty interesting. Now, what I think is important as far as the endings go is that I heard multiple people say that there are no happy endings in this film. No matter what you choose, you get a sad, depressing, or dreary ending. But I wouldn't necessarily say that that's true. Although that is true about the 5 main endings, as it either ends with Stefan in prison for killing his father, or Stefan dead, or going insane, or he realizes that he's on set on Black Mirror. Which, okay, that isn't necessarily a sad ending, but it's not really a happy one either. But if you include the dead ends, I think there are a couple of what I might call happy endings, or at least endings where the outlook for Stefan looks hopeful. The main exception of that being the dead end where he jumps off the balcony, because that ends with him dead, just like the time travel ending. But the rest of them, Stefan is okay. Sure, his game is a failure, but he's alive, his dad's alive, and he's not in jail, so that's happier than any of the other options. However, two options in particular I think imply that Stefan is actually going to be alright, that he's going to heal. One is where he chooses to destroy the computer and his father comes in and comforts him, and the other is where he chooses to back off from killing his dad and his dad comforts him. In both cases, you get the impression that Stefan is beginning the healing process. Sure, the game never gets finished and his career never takes off, but that's exactly what this film is trying to say. That making the game is unhealthy for Stefan, so if he makes it, it's not going to end well for him, and the only way to avoid tragedy is to stop making the game and confront his inner demons instead. Also, I find it interesting that the only way to get a happy ending is to quote-unquote lose the game. If Stefan and his dad are alive and, well, not in prison, it means you lost the game and you made the wrong choice, which I think is making commentary on how what's best for someone isn't necessarily what's most entertaining or interesting to watch. In those two endings where Stefan embraces his dad, I think it can be inferred that he begins a long, arduous healing process where he learns to be at peace with himself and decisions that he's made, and he learns to forgive his dad. But that's not very interesting to watch, is it? Kind of like what Dr. Haynes said in the Netflix ending, that wouldn't someone watching for entertainment want more action than to see a guy with his therapist healing? They'd rather see Stefan kill his dad and chop off his head and hang it like an ornament. But let me now get into what I think the film is really about and why I love it so much. So, Bandersnatch is about Stefan, a boy whose mother died when he was 5 years old on a derailed train. She apparently was on that train because Stefan made her late by looking for a toy rabbit that his father hid from him. So, Stefan has held a resentment towards his father for hiding the toy. Further, this made him obsessed with the question of how much power do the decisions we make affect our lives, and how much control do we really have over our lives? Has he often wondered if choosing differently in regards to making his mother late would have had a different outcome, or would it make no difference whatsoever? So he then becomes obsessed with this Choose Your Own Adventure book that he found in his mother's possessions, as the author of it was apparently also struggling with the same issues, as he was haunted by a lion-like demon called Pax, and he came to the conclusion that he had no control over his decisions, as all of his decisions were already made for him, so he ended up killing his own wife. So the film shows Stefan exploring this and all the different outcomes. So one of the brilliant things about this film is that it can be interpreted in multiple ways, which I love so much. It uses the interactive feature to make meta commentary on the subject at hand of how the choices we make affect our lives. There are several hints that the choices we make have no effect, as everything is determined for us, such as several times, regardless of which option you choose, the outcome is the same, such as when Colin offers Stefan LSD. Regardless of if you say yes or no, Stefan's going to do the LSD. And Colin himself believes that there are multiple timelines, so every decision we make happens all the time in all these different timelines, so it doesn't matter which choice we make, which is also along the lines of how the author of Bandersnatch feels. However, we see through the interactive play ourselves that the choices we make do drastically affect Stefan, as by making one choice he kills his dad and goes to prison for life, but by making another he reconciles with his dad and begins to heal. So the film really plays with this and some sci-fi concepts like multiple realities and time travel. And control is a huge theme throughout the film. In fact, a good drinking game would be to play is to drink every time someone mentions control in this film. At the start, Stefan tells Dr. Haynes he turned down the offer to work at Tuckersoft because he felt like they would control him. The documentary about the Bandersnatch author, the interviewee, when talking about his philosophy, said that you're not in control of your actions, so why not commit murder? And Colin rants about program and control, all dealing with conspiracy theories about the government controlling you. And right before Stefan killed his father, the thing that Stefan kept repeating is that I'm not in control. I'm not in control. All this, I feel, is linked to how Stefan felt he had no control over his mother's death, so ultimately control is the main theme. I particularly like how when Stefan is telling the story of his mother's death to Dr. Haynes, when Stefan's mother asks him to come with her, it plays out like you had to select an option, but it only gives you one option to choose: no. This emphasizes that the past can't be altered and that Stefan has to live with the choice that he has made, and I thought that was a brilliant way to get that across. But in the time travel ending, you get the same scene, but now you have the option to say yes, which strongly emphasizes Stefan's desire to change the past and say yes, but I'll touch more on that a bit later. But I think the issue of control is a real issue that many people do struggle with. How much control does one have over their lives? Some may quit a job or end a relationship or move to a different town in an effort to gain more control over their lives. So it's an important issue and an interesting topic to tackle, and I think this film does it very well. Now, the thing about Bandersnatch is there are multiple ways to interpret it, and everyone's going to have their own take on it, which is part of the reason why I find this film so brilliant. So now I'm going to get into my own personal interpretation. What I'm about to describe is by no means the definitive breakdown of the film, but rather my own personal interpretation of what I think happens in this film. And basically, I don't actually think that any of the supernatural or sci-fi elements presented in this film are genuine and are pretty much all inside Stefan's head. In fact, I do believe Stefan is extremely open to suggestion, and it is easy to influence his perception. For example, I heard one review express the opinion that Colin was explaining what was going to happen during his tripping scene, but I think it's more of a case that Stefan was hearing what Colin said and letting that influence his perception. There are many cases where we are shown what we see on screen is just in Stefan's head, such as when Pax or the author of Bandersnatch pop out and scare Stefan. And there are other scenes we're left to question whether it really happened or not, if Stefan just imagined it. So here's my interpretation. Stefan is a psychologically damaged person. He was damaged by his mother's death and how the choices he and his father made affected that death. So he becomes obsessed with a choose-your-own-adventure book with a dark past that's all about how pointless decisions are and how one has no control of their lives. And the more he works on adapting this book to a video game, the more it affects his reality, and he starts to feel like the decisions he makes aren't his own and that someone else is making it for them. When he takes LSD with Colin and Colin tells him about the program and control theory that government plants agents that pose as family members who drug your food and control your lives, he starts to have delusions about how his dad is one such government agent and that everything was just a fucked up experiment, and so he never had any control over anything in the first place. This is just a delusion with no basis in reality that he only thought of because of what Colin said. And speaking of Colin, his LSD-fueled rant is perfect because it is just the kind of shit that people say on LSD. There's no basis for it in reality. It's just a drug-fueled conspiracy theory nonsense, and I give no more credence to Colin's rantings than I do to anyone else's. But Stefan, as I said, is very susceptible to suggestion. After scenes like the one where Colin jumps off the balcony, or where he imagines he can travel back in time through mirrors, or when he finds out about his father's program and control study, the film always shows him waking up as if from a dream. Now, I believe that's because they are all dreams or delusions. With the Colin tripping scene, I believe Colin didn't jump, and he didn't. That Stefan just imagined the part where he jumped, which is why Kitty doesn't remember any of this happening. Now, why Colin disappeared coincidentally, I can't say, but it's not because he jumped off a balcony. And in some endings where they do the news report after Stefan kills his dad, they mention that Colin can't be found, and that Stefan claims that he jumped off a building, but there's no evidence for that. So to most people, Stefan just comes off as crazy, and frankly, I think that's because he is. Just like he goes mad and kills his dad after having the fantasy of the program in control, he kills his dad and then calls up Dr. Haynes and threatens to kill her. He sounds absolutely batshit crazy here, and that's because he totally is. And as I said, it's very... Stefan's very susceptible to suggestion, so researching Bandersnatch and then, the guy who killed his wife led him to do something similar to his dad. And the documentary that suggested that he has no control over anything, so why not just commit murder, seeped into its head, and that's why he kept telling his dad that he had no control just before killing him. So I know many people, including myself, has said that Stefan becomes aware that we're making decisions for him, and so it's a meta situation where he's aware that he's in a game or a Netflix interactive movie. But actually, I think that's only true of the Netflix endings. I believe the Netflix endings are there to satisfy that possibility for the viewer that yes, this is a meta situation and you're watching this on Netflix. This is particularly true on the meta ending where he's on set. The ending where he goes mad and gets dragged out by his father shows just how insane he is by thinking that he's in an interactive game. But beyond those two endings, which are just there to satisfy the likelihood for the audience, I don't believe he is being controlled by us, the viewer. Rather, he's letting his own obsession with the possibilities that he has no control over his actions get the better of him, and the interactive feature is just a way to personify this for the viewer. But in universe, it's his subconscious that's controlling him, not us, the viewer, which because of his particular brand of madness he sees as an outside force. And the time travel ending, I think, is a very clear indication of this, as it could have just shown him and his mother on the train and it derails and they die, but instead it makes a point of going back to the present where Stefan is sitting in Dr. Haynes' office and he just dies. In this case, I feel Stefan literally just gave up on his life and his delusion that he'd rather die with his mother, so that translates into his body thinking that he was dead. I know this is a little experimental, not 100% in the realm of reality, but that's a similar concept to if you're dreaming of drowning, you hold your breath in real life, or like in The Matrix, where someone in The Matrix kills you, you die in real life because you think you're dead, and I think that's the case here. But regardless, I think the scene here is to illustrate that it wasn't just actual time travel, to show that it was actually going on in his head and that these are delusions that he's having. And I actually think that translates to the whole film. So next you might ask, well, then how do I account for the way people behave, the way people's behavior changes when you go back and try again? Like how Colin recognizes Stefan and says that he's read Bandersnatch, and how Stefan knows what Dr. Haynes is going to say. Well, I feel that when you go back, this is all in Stefan's head, and he's imagining that he's doing things differently, which is why he knows what some people are going to say and just wants them to get on with it, or why he imagines Colin differently and is already aware of him. In fact, I would say the entire film is in Stefan's head, and he's imagining all the different possibilities, which is why there is no real definitive ending or proper order to do things, and whatever order you get the endings to do things doesn't really matter, because the whole entire thing is in Stefan's head. Because the whole thing are like twisted versions on what actually occurred, which is why sometimes things don't quite match up. Who's to say what actually happened and whether the real Cullen was obsessed with parallel realities and going back and trying to change things, or if that's just something Stefan put in himself to goad himself into going back in his head to try things again. After all, we see him continually writing the glyph symbols on his prison wall, and oftentimes while Colin goads him to go back and try again. So I think that he is insane and does all these mind trips into the past to try to do things differently as he writes these glyphs on the wall. So in the case of the definitive ending, that would be the 5-star ending, because that shoots to the present time to show Cullen's daughter Pearl, and this, I believe, is the only time in the film we leave Stefan's perception, or inside Stefan's head. The endings where he dies can't be definitive in my interpretation because he needs to be alive in order to imagine all these different ways of doing things. But I do find it interesting that in the time travel ending, that by changing the past, his mother still misses the train, and she still has to take a later one that derails. Almost as if Stefan's subconscious is letting him off the hook for that one, saying whatever choice he made would have made no difference. Also, that's why most of the endings end in tragedy, because his real life ended in tragedy, and the ones that don't end in tragedy aren't really realistic or interesting to him, which is why they aren't explored more. But as I said, that's just my interpretation. I'm sure there are holes in that, and many people may have different interpretations. Some of them may be, it means nothing, and it's just the producers of Black Mirror fucking around with this interactive narrative. Sure, you're entitled to that interpretation, and I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong, just that I strongly disagree with that, and I see that as a I see this film as a highly interpretive piece of art that makes use of this new feature in a very creative and meta way that speaks to the question of how much control do we have over our lives, and to what extent do the decisions we make affect the outcome of our lives. So my rating for Black Mirror Bandersnatch out of 10 is a 10 the best. Now, I gave it a 9 at first because I was a tad bit off-put by the fact that this film didn't seem to have a structure and that the viewing experience would differ depending on what outcome you choose. But later I realized that it doesn't necessarily need to be a structure to this film, because the structure is fluid, and that all the endings contribute to the whole as they all build toward the main theme of Stefan examining how control affects his lives and how much control does he have over his life. So in fact, I would argue that which ending you get first or which ending you prefer isn't really the point. That to truly appreciate this film, you have to see all the endings, or most of them. Therefore, it needs to be viewed multiple times, and I know for some people this is off-putting, but for me, these are the types of films that I love the best. And there's a lot of complexity, a lot of metaphors, and thought-provoking themes to examine in this film, and in my opinion, that makes this a masterful work of art. So that's it for my recap, review, and analysis of Black Mirror Bandersnatch. Thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to check out my channel for more Black Mirror content, as well as I cover many other shows like Star Trek, Game of Thrones, The Expanse, Lost, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.